The palace has seen scandals before, but nothing prepared the nation for the chilling moment when Prince William made a move so drastic, it shook the monarchy's foundations. He stripped Camilla's granddaughter of her royal title. It was a decision delivered with the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. A statement not whispered in private, but declared with the authority of a man who will one day wear the crown. Those who witnessed it described the moment as unlike anything they had ever seen. No hesitation, no falter, only the icy certainty of a prince determined to reshape the monarchy in his own image. The announcement came without warning. Courtiers who had served the crown through decades of triumph and scandal alike were left in stunned silence. Many had been briefed on minor matters, prepared for the ceremonial motions of another routine royal day. But nothing in their rehearsed schedules accounted for this. The words cut through the air like glass shattering on marble. A royal title once bestowed as an unshakable symbol of acceptance into the institution was being torn away, publicly and without mercy. This was not the cautious diplomacy expected from a man known for restraint. This was cold steel, and the effect was immediate. Whispers spread instantly across Buckingham Palace corridors. "Why now?" servants muttered to one another in hushed tones, while senior aides scrambled for explanations that did not exist. Those who had witnessed William's face said it was set, his jaw tight, his eyes resolute. This was not an act of sudden temper. No, it felt planned, deliberate, a calculated stroke intended to send a message. But to whom? And for what reason? Camilla's granddaughter had never been a figure of tabloid scandal. She was seen as quiet, almost distant from the chaos of the spotlight. She represented the part of Camilla's family that preferred anonymity over grandeur. And yet William's act implied that beneath this facade of calm, there was something deeper at play, something that made her very existence within the royal fold a threat in his eyes. The move hinted at years of tension, buried frustrations, and an invisible line that had finally been crossed. Staff who filled the room when the words were spoken described it as frozen in time. Even the most seasoned royal aides, hardened by decades of crisis management, were speechless. These were individuals who had lived through the death of Diana, the controversies of Prince Andrew, the chaos of Harry and Meghan, and yet none of it seemed to compare to the gravity of this moment. One senior aide reportedly muttered that it was like watching a piece of the monarchy itself being ripped away before their very eyes. And then came Camilla's reaction. She was said to have been struck first by disbelief, then by a wave of fury so visceral it left her trembling. Those closest to her described tears streaming as she demanded answers, her voice cracking between anger and heartbreak. It wasn't just about her granddaughter's lost title. It was the humiliation, the sense that William had chosen to draw a line between her blood and Diana's, between her family and his. In that single act, the queen consort found herself diminished, not just as Charles's wife, but as a grandmother stripped of pride. But for William, this was never just about punishment. Those close to him whispered that it was about reclaiming something sacred. The purity of the crown, the legacy of his mother, the integrity of the institution he will one day inherit. For him, the stripping of this title was not a scandal to be avoided, it was a statement to be remembered. He wanted the monarchy to know that Diana's son would not bend to compromises that blurred the bloodline or allowed shadows from the past to encroach on the future. And yet, with the ink of his decision barely dry, a question hung heavily over the nation. What could drive a future king to humiliate his step-grandmother's family so publicly? The answer, as it unravels, reveals years of tension, betrayal, and hidden secrets. This wasn't a sudden burst of anger. This was a wound that had been bleeding for years, now torn open for the world to see. For William, the decision to strip Camilla's granddaughter of her royal title was not born out of impulse, but out of years of suppressed frustration. It was a frustration rooted in memories of his mother, Diana, and the painful intrusion of Camilla into their lives. The echoes of those childhood wounds never truly faded, and each passing year seemed to deepen his conviction that Camilla's bloodline should never sit comfortably within the walls of monarchy. From the beginning, William carried a distrust of Camilla's family that no public smiles or carefully staged events could erase. Those who knew him intimately revealed that he bristled at the thought of Camilla's children and grandchildren being treated as royal insiders, as though by marriage alone they had earned rights to a throne they never bled for. He watched as society papers began referring to them as part of the royal circle, a subtle shift that felt like an insult to the memory of Diana. To William, it was as if history was being rewritten, slowly and deliberately, to favor the woman his mother once considered her greatest rival. Moments over the years only fueled his unease. At certain state occasions, Camilla's family was said to have overstepped boundaries, occupying seats reserved for senior royals, mingling in circles where protocol dictated they remain silent, and speaking with a confidence that belied their unofficial standing. Though small in appearance, these gestures were enormous in symbolism. They were signs of encroachment, of entitlement, of a creeping influence William believed was threatening the integrity of the institution he had sworn to protect. The tensions did not stay confined to public events. They spilled into the private halls of family gatherings. Reports surfaced of clashes between William and Camilla's daughter, Laura Lopes, whose loyalty to her mother created unspoken rivalries. Heated words exchanged over family dinners, moments of cold silence in shared spaces. These were not scenes the cameras ever captured, but they were real to those who bore witness. Each confrontation chipped away at the already fragile thread of civility that held this blended royal family together. At the core of it all was William's unwavering loyalty to his mother's legacy. He had grown up determined never to allow Diana's memory to be overshadowed or replaced, and every step Camilla's family took into the spotlight felt like an erasure. For him, defending Diana's honor was not merely personal, it was his duty. The monarchy's history, in his eyes, must be defined by her sacrifice, her suffering, and her enduring connection to the people, not by the ascendancy of those who had once played a part in her heartbreak. Kate Middleton, ever the quiet force beside him, understood this deeply. She recognized the dangers of letting Camilla's family grow roots within the monarchy's structure. Her quiet nods of support, her measured words behind closed doors, strengthened William's resolve. She knew the future crown had to carry a clean narrative, one untarnished by associations that could ignite public distrust. Kate's subtle reinforcement became the anchor William needed, confirming that he was not alone in viewing Camilla's lineage as a looming risk. Still, even with years of resentment festering beneath the surface, William's actions remained measured. He bided his time, waiting, watching, and calculating. But resentment alone doesn't strip a royal title. There had to be a trigger, a spark that turned William's private frustration into public retribution. Behind the polished palace walls, a secret scandal erupted, one so damaging it left William with no choice but to act. For years, whispers had circled about Camilla's family, benefiting quietly from their proximity to the crown. But what surfaced now was no mere rumor. It was a revelation capable of toppling reputations, shaking public trust, and unraveling the fragile balance of the monarchy. The scandal struck at the very heart of the institution and touched a name William vowed to protect above all else, his mother, Diana. It began as murmurs in the corridors, whispers that Camilla's granddaughter had been involved in a private deal, one that appeared to exploit royal connections for personal advantage. On its own, such speculation might have been brushed aside, dismissed as the idle chatter of jealous rivals. But the stakes grew when confidential documents began to surface. These papers suggested influence peddling, subtle yet undeniable, where favors were exchanged and access was quietly monetized. The illusion of separation between the monarchy and private gain shattered in an instant, and William knew the walls around the crown had been breached. The most devastating blow came when William discovered that charities connected to his mother's name, Diana's cherished causes, were indirectly pulled into the controversy. The very foundations built to honor her legacy were suddenly tainted by association, dragged into a scandal they had no part in. For William, it was unthinkable. To see Diana's work, her lifelong dedication to compassion and dignity, twisted into collateral damage, was intolerable. It was no longer about palace politics or personal grievances. It was about defending her memory from being corrupted. The fears spread quickly. If this reached the public uncontained, it would not only tarnish Camilla's family, but could leave a permanent stain on the crown itself. The monarchy, already fragile in the eyes of many, could not survive another scandal that reeked of privilege and exploitation. Senior palace aides, aware of the storm brewing, urged caution. They counseled William to remain silent, to allow the matter to fade into whispers and shadows, far from the scrutiny of cameras and headlines. But William refused. He had lived through the cost of silence before. when his mother was left to battle alone, and he would not allow history to repeat itself. The tension reached a breaking point when William allegedly confronted Camilla directly. Accounts of that exchange describe a clash of wills unlike anything the palace had seen in decades. William, unflinching, demanded answers, pressing Camilla with the weight of truth. Camilla, defensive and furious, denied wrongdoing, insisting her granddaughter was innocent of any manipulation. Charles, caught in the middle, was said to have stood frozen, his wife on one side, his son on the other, the monarchy trembling between them. It was not just a confrontation, it was a collision of legacies, a reckoning long in the making. William's choice was clear. He would not protect what he believed was indefensible. By stripping Camilla's granddaughter of her royal title, he was sending a message that corruption would not be tolerated, not even within the family, not even if it risked tearing the monarchy apart. To him, this was not vengeance, but necessity. The line had been crossed, and it had threatened everything he held sacred. Yet the scandal was only the surface. What truly broke William's patience was something far more personal. To understand William's decision, we must look at the shadow he never escaped, the shadow of Diana, and the woman who replaced her in the palace. From his earliest memories, Camilla's presence lingered like a ghost at the edges of his childhood. Even before she officially entered the royal stage, William knew her name, her role, and the pain she represented. To him, she was not just another figure in his father's life. She was the living reminder of Diana's suffering. That knowledge never left him, shaping his outlook, his decisions, and the deep resentment that, years later, would erupt into a public reckoning. For William, Diana's memory was sacred, something untouchable and pure. Every action he took as a young man, every choice he made as he stepped closer to the throne, was filtered through his devotion to his mother's legacy. He carried within him a lifelong determination to ensure that her bloodline, not Camilla's, not anyone else's, would remain the heart of the monarchy. The line of succession, in his eyes, could not and should not be diluted by outsiders who had once been tied to his mother's heartbreak. In private, he reportedly told close friends that Diana's sacrifice would mean nothing if Camilla's family could claim an equal place in history. Camilla, however, had other intentions. Once she entered the palace as queen consort, she sought not only acceptance for herself, but integration for her children and grandchildren. She wanted them woven into the fabric of royal life, attending events, standing beside her at gatherings, and basking in the glow of the crown's authority. To many, it seemed harmless, even natural. But William saw it as an invasion, a slow erosion of the monarchy's true bloodline. His pushback was quiet, but relentless. When requests arose for Camilla's grandchildren to be given certain privileges, William is said to have resisted. Whether it was seating arrangements at state functions or access to resources reserved for blood royals, he made sure the line between insider and outsider remained visible. This quiet defiance created a rift between William and his father. Charles, blinded by love and loyalty to Camilla, viewed her family as his own. He welcomed them, defended them, and often stood against William in matters of protocol. To Charles, they were part of his world, and therefore deserving of space within the monarchy. To William, this was nothing short of betrayal, a rewriting of the institution to serve Camilla's desires rather than Diana's legacy. The conflict simmered beneath the surface, but with every passing year, the distance between father and son grew wider. What stung most was the realization that Camilla's influence had begun to stretch further than Diana's memory ever could. With Charles at her side, Camilla carved her place into the monarchy with unwavering persistence. She reshaped narratives, redefined her role, and slowly cemented her children and grandchildren as fixtures at the palace. To William, it was unbearable. The more Camilla's presence expanded, the more it felt as though Diana was being pushed into the shadows of history. Each time the cameras captured Camilla's family at royal events, William's frustration deepened. Each gesture of acceptance toward them felt like another betrayal of the mother he lost too soon. This anger, though often hidden behind a carefully measured exterior, burned within William. It guided his decisions, sharpened his resolve, and laid the foundation for the drastic move he would later make. For him, stripping Camilla's granddaughter of her royal title was not just about scandal, or protocol, or even justice. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen long ago. It was about ensuring that Diana's bloodline, and Diana's alone, defined the future of the crown. But as William's resentment boiled, the nation's eyes turned to Camilla herself. Her reaction revealed just how fragile the monarchy had become. When William's decision became public, Camilla's fury shook the palace hall's tiers, shouting, and a confrontation that could not be hidden. What had begun as whispers in corridors erupted into a storm within the royal household. Those who stood nearby described her face etched with disbelief, her voice trembling as she demanded answers. For Camilla, the act was more than a loss of title for her granddaughter. It was a direct strike at her dignity, a humiliation delivered by the very man who would one day be king. In her words, it was nothing short of betrayal, and the sting cut deeper, because it came not from an enemy, but from within her own family. She wasted no time turning to Charles, pleading for him to step in, to undo what William had done. Camilla's desperation was palpable, a mixture of anger and fear that the title stripped away was more than symbolic. It was a message to her and her entire bloodline. Yet Charles found himself caught in the cruelest of dilemmas. On one side stood his wife, broken, wounded, demanding his loyalty. On the other, his son and heir, resolute, unbending, and carrying the weight of Diana's shadow behind him. To choose one meant to wound the other, and in that moment, the crown itself became the battlefield of a family war. Private conversations later revealed how bitter the confrontation grew. Camilla accused William of waging war not just against her granddaughter, but against her entire family. She claimed he had waited for the perfect moment to humiliate them, to remind her that no matter what titles she bore, no matter what position she had secured at Charles's side, her bloodline would never truly belong. William, however, stood firm. Those who saw him in those tense exchanges described him as cold, unwavering, almost clinical in his determination. He was not moved by tears or fury. He was driven by conviction. Through it all, Kate's presence was impossible to ignore. Standing silently yet firmly beside William, she radiated calm in contrast to Camilla's storm. She did not need to speak many words. Her posture alone spoke volumes. She was the embodiment of solidarity, her quiet strength reinforcing William's unshakable stance. In Camilla's eyes, Kate's support may have felt like salt in the wound, another reminder that the next generation of monarchy was firmly aligned against her. But outside the palace walls, a different battle was already unfolding. For the first time since becoming queen consort, cracks in Camilla's public perception began to widen. The narrative shifted almost instantly. Sympathy, once cautiously extended toward her, began to pour instead toward William. Many saw his act as courageous, a defense of Diana's legacy, a refusal to allow the monarchy to be diluted by those tied not by blood, but by scandal. The public, long divided in their loyalties, suddenly leaned toward the prince who had carried his mother's pain for decades. And as Camilla's fury spread through the palace, it ignited something far larger than a private dispute. The people began to take sides, and the arguments that once echoed only in royal chambers now reverberated across the nation, sparking a reaction that no one in the palace could ignore. Outside palace walls, the nation erupted. Was William right to strip the title, or had he gone too far? The decision, shocking in its suddenness, fractured public opinion, but also awakened memories long buried in the collective heart of the people. For many, it was not just about Camilla's granddaughter losing a title. It was about old wounds, Diana's suffering, and the deep question of what the monarchy should represent in the modern age. In coffee shops, at dinner tables, on radio talk shows, and across every social platform, the debate burned hotter than anyone inside the palace could have anticipated. Polls taken in the immediate aftermath revealed a clear trend. The majority of the public sided firmly with William. To them, his act was not reckless, but righteous. Elderly citizens, those who had lived through the tumult of Charles and Diana's marriage, spoke with trembling voices of the pain Diana endured. For them, William's bold step was seen as the ultimate act of loyalty to his late mother, a gesture of protection that came decades too late, but carried symbolic power nonetheless. They praised his courage for doing what no one else had dared to do, drawing a hard line between Diana's legacy and Camilla's influence. Younger generations, however, introduced a different layer to the discussion. For them, the issue was not just about Diana or Camilla, but about the monarchy itself. They questioned whether titles had any place in a world fighting for equality and merit. Some argued that William's move revealed the hypocrisy of clinging to tradition while pretending to modernize. Others admired him for standing firm, saying that if titles must exist, then they should remain sacred and free of political manipulation. This generational divide only deepened the storm of voices echoing across the nation. The media wasted no time drawing parallels between the old battles of Diana's life and the privileges afforded to Camilla's family. Headlines screamed of history repeating itself, of William rising as the protector his mother never had. Editorials dissected every detail, painting Camilla's family as beneficiaries of favoritism that had never been earned, while contrasting it with Diana's tragic downfall. The comparisons stoked emotion, reigniting the sense of injustice that had haunted the monarchy since the 1990s. Political figures, though cautious in their language, quietly weighed in. Some feared William's decision exposed fractures within the monarchy that could no longer be hidden. Others saw opportunity in aligning with the public mood, praising William's decisiveness as proof that the crown could evolve under his leadership. But behind the scenes, concern was rising. The crown's stability, already fragile, was being tested in a way few had foreseen. And then came the tidal wave of social media. Within hours, hashtags linked to Diana, William, and Camilla trended worldwide. Memes, commentaries, and raw emotional outbursts dominated feeds. Some voices defended Camilla, arguing she had endured enough public scorn, but those were drowned out by an overwhelming chorus praising William. Diana's son finally stands tall. Read one viral post. The people's anger, love, and memories converged into a global frenzy that amplified every fracture in the palace. But while the people raged outside, the palace was descending into chaos because this decision had ripple effects far beyond one granddaughter. Stripping one title might seem small, but in the monarchy, it is a chain reaction, and William had just set it in motion. What began as a decisive strike against Camilla's granddaughter soon spiraled into a question of precedent. If one title could be taken away, what would stop others from following? Whispers filled the palace as courtiers scrambled to understand the new boundaries of power. The monarchy, long governed by tradition and protocol, was suddenly forced to reckon with a prince who had shown he was willing to defy convention itself. The first questions inevitably turned to Camilla's other grandchildren. Would their privileges remain untouched, or would William extend his hand further? Each grandchild represented not only personal ties, but also symbolic encroachment into the royal space. The idea that William could, at any moment, redraw the lines of inclusion terrified those who had worked tirelessly to present unity. This was no longer an isolated punishment. It was a warning, one that could sweep away the fragile balance the crown had tried to maintain since Charles married Camilla. Behind closed doors, concern spread to other royals. Some feared William's boldness threatened to unravel decades of carefully built alliances, while others quietly supported his conviction but dared not say it aloud. Reports of hushed conversations between Anne, Edward, and even distant cousins suggested that the move had unsettled the entire family. If William could strike against Camilla's kin, then no one outside the direct bloodline could feel safe. For the first time in years, royal titles, once believed to be untouchable, seemed vulnerable. William, however, remained unyielding. His insistence was clear. The monarchy's legitimacy must rest on blood, not marriage. To him, this was not cruelty, but clarity. The crown could not be shared, diluted, or reshaped by those with no direct claim. In his eyes, Diana's children and their descendants were the rightful heart of the monarchy, and no step relatives, however close to Charles, could ever be allowed to blur that truth. His words carried a chilling finality. He would not compromise, even if it fractured the family beyond repair. The ripples of his actions reached beyond Camilla's circle and into the uneasy world of Meghan and Harry. Though they lived outside the palace's embrace, they too wondered what this meant for their children. If William was redefining the rules of legitimacy, then Archie and Lilibet could one day find themselves caught in the same net. Friends of the Sussexes speculated that this move was a message to all. William was ready to strip away titles if they threatened his vision of the crown's purity. Anxiety hung heavy, not just in London, but across oceans, as the meaning of his precedent sank in. Advisors grew increasingly alarmed. They warned that William's bold strike had cracked open a door that could never again be closed. By removing one title, He had redefined the very nature of royal hierarchy. What had once been sacred now seemed negotiable, fragile, and subject to the will of the next monarch. Some saw in it a dangerous instability, while others argued it was a necessary correction. Either way, there was no denying that William had rewritten the rules, and the monarchy would never again be the same. And as protocol collapsed, the heart of the family was torn apart, forcing Charles into the most painful choice of his reign. A king's greatest test is not ruling a nation, but ruling his family. Charles now stood between the woman he loved and the son who would inherit his crown. It was a trial no monarch could prepare for, a battle not of politics, but of blood and loyalty, and it left him torn apart. In the privacy of his chambers, he wrestled with the impossible. To protect Camilla meant undermining William, but to side with William meant wounding the woman who had stood by his side for decades. The weight was crushing, and those closest to him whispered that the king was unraveling beneath the pressure. Behind palace doors, Charles's breakdown became increasingly visible. Aides spoke of late-night pacing, hushed arguments, and the heavy silences of a man suffocated by his own choices. Camilla demanded action, insisting that William's decision could not be allowed to stand. Her anger burned not just for her granddaughter, but for the humiliation she herself had endured. William, on the other hand, remained defiant, unbending in his resolve. Charles was forced into a cruel middle ground, caught between two forces that refused to yield. The shadow of his mother, Queen Elizabeth, loomed heavily over him. All his life, Charles had lived in the knowledge that she placed duty above all else. Duty before love, duty before family, duty before personal happiness. She had taught him that the crown was not a possession, but a responsibility. Now, he was expected to uphold that same principle, but it came at the cost of tearing his family apart. The memory of her discipline haunted him, reminding him of what she might have done in his place, and he feared he lacked her strength. The conflict soon spilled into open confrontation. Reports surfaced of shouting matches between Charles and William, their voices echoing through the palace. The arguments were heated, raw, and deeply personal. William refused to retreat, declaring that he was acting not as a rebellious son, but as the future king, safeguarding the monarchy. Charles, exasperated, accused William of recklessness. Anne, ever the mediator, attempted to intervene, urging calm, but even her steady presence could not bridge the chasm that had opened between father and son. Matters worsened when Camilla, in a dramatic escalation, allegedly threatened to withdraw from certain royal duties altogether. She declared that if her family was to be humiliated in public, she would not stand before the cameras as though nothing had happened. For Charles, the threat was devastating. To lose her visible support would fracture the image of a united monarchy he had worked tirelessly to present. Yet, to bow to her demands would mean undermining William's authority and, with it, the future of the crown. William's words during one of these confrontations cut deeper than any blade. The crown must remain pure. It was not just a rejection of Camilla's family, but a declaration of war on everything Charles had tried to build with her by his side. The sentence echoed through the palace like a prophecy, one that left no room for compromise. Charles realized, perhaps too late, that the unity of the monarchy was slipping through his fingers. The dynasty he had fought his whole life to protect was now fracturing in ways he could not mend. But as Charles faltered, William pressed forward, driven not by power, but by something far more personal: Diana's shadow. In the end, this wasn't just about Camilla's granddaughter. It was about a promise made long ago to a woman who died too soon. William's decision was more than a disciplinary act. It was his ultimate tribute to Diana, the mother whose absence defined his life, and whose memory continued to shape the choices he made. By stripping away the title, he drew a line in history, a symbolic gesture that cut through the decades, declaring that Diana's bloodline would remain the unshakable heart of the monarchy. The move was heavy with meaning. It was not simply about Camilla's family being pushed to the margins, but about ensuring they could never overshadow the memory of the woman the world still adored. Kate's quiet resolve throughout the ordeal only amplified the sense that Diana's spirit was alive in the next generation. Her calm strength beside William echoed the same grace Diana carried in the face of turmoil, as though guiding her son from beyond the grave. Across the nation, mourning for Diana reignited. Candlelit vigils appeared once more. Her face adorned newspapers and timelines, and the people spoke of her as if she had never left. William's act reminded the public of the pain she endured, and in standing against Camilla's lineage, he seemed to deliver the justice she had been denied in her lifetime. Yet, it came at a cost. The monarchy, once presented as a family united under one crown, now stood divided. Its image fractured. It was no longer bound by unity, but by legacy. A legacy chosen by William, shaped by loyalty to his mother. And in that haunting realization lay the truth. William's rule would not be defined by Charles's crown, but by Diana's memory. Every step he took as future king would be measured against the shadow of the woman whose love and suffering etched themselves into the nation's soul. And as the nation reacts with both admiration and unease, one truth remains. This was not just the stripping of a title, it was the beginning of a new monarchy, forged in conflict, shadowed by the past, and destined for battles yet to come. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.